Hi, everyone. This is going to be an episode consistent with the one we just did about Constantine being not a Christian. And this situation or this episode will focus on the consecration coin that he had struck while he is dying and preparing for death. This is what's on his mind, and he's going to define how he wants to be remembered. And in this part, we're continuing to look at the article by Martin Wallraff, a professor in Munich, and we gave you all his background and qualifications to give this opinion. He's an evangelical Protestant theology professor, and these are his words about this coin. He says within a few days of his death, Constantine had himself baptized. Now, that's a question mark some people have, and so I haven't examined that, but some people say he was already dead when he was baptized. So that's not his choice, but this is conventional opinion that he was actually baptized willingly. But here's the key. So it's almost irrelevant, even if he did. It doesn't prove anything if the next sentence is true. And he had the coin struck where he is represented as sun god. What does that mean? Was he a schizoid person? So that's the question you're left with. Or is he really a Christian? So schizoid isn't the issue. It's is he been defrauding us all along? That's the real question. Here's what the coin looks like. And this is at the British Museum, and this is the description, the official description, and it tells you it's a Constantine veiled or draped. He's riding a chariot. He's galloping to the right. He's grasping reins in his left hand and raising his right hand to grasp the hand of what's called God. But if you look carefully, can you tell what kind of God that is? Looks like the sun. Anyway, and the inscription was Divus Constantinus AVG Pater AVGG. And I'll explain what that is. But coins in those days had these cryptic ways of saying a lot, and that means the god Constantine the Great, and then AVG means Augustus is technically what it means, but in Latin that means revered, pater, revered father. AVGG means that he was revered among two emperors. So there was a period of time where he's sole emperor and he'd be revered father of the country, and that's since 324. But he always had a co-emperor who was a rival of his until he defeated Licentius in 324. We'll go through that. So the characteristic that we're seeing on the right, I'm going to show you. Remember, this whole religion of Sol Invictus, this sun chariot riding god, came from Syria when Basinius in the early 200s brought a Syrian god, a rival of Yahweh, in First Kings chapter 18, where Baal is up against Elijah and his prophets. Elijah's against the prophets of Baal, and he defeats them. And but this religion didn't go away, and it had a lot of imagery that is reflected here. So it was literally transported, image and all, into the heart of Rome. But it was called, at first, it was actually called Baal, Baal. And so the Syrian emperor wasn't getting anywhere, so he changed it to El Gabal, which was Elohim, Ga, and then Baal. And the next emperor, Aurelian, said, we got to clear this up. Well, let's give him a Latin name. And they called him Sol Invictus. And what's interesting through this article by this professor, and let's go back to his name, Martin Wallraff, is we learn that what really is going on here is solar monotheism. And what I would say is you could call it that, or you could call it the superiority of one God over all other gods. You might want to call that solar monotheism, but it means that a god of the sun could tolerate there are other gods that exist, but none of them can be anywhere superior, equal to that himself. There's no such thing as an equality of gods in this religion. This religion is there's one supreme God, and it's Baal, but there are other gods, but they're just not supreme. Okay. So anyway, now we'll go into this, and I think this is just corroborative proof of something we already knew, but I think from purposes, if you like Bible issues, is I'm going to show you how this is the religion of Baal at Rome, and that's who Constantine thought he was really serving. Baal not consciously, because the name changes had changed it. So he was given new names that he could believe in, but it was always Baal. That's who literally Basinius had brought into Rome in the 200s, and it was just simply Aurelian who Romanized the name, and then Constantine just went with the ball. And we'll see some of the more in depth of what was going on here. So the title of this episode is Constantine's Consecration Coin, as he was dying, proves Constantine's true aim all along was to have us Christians see him as a charioteer conquering god of the sun, Baal. Okay, and that's who. So that was one thing that maybe that was an innovation by Basinius, that this was the god of the sun. That's the only thing you might say, is that could have been a Roman innovation or not. May have been who Baal was claiming to be too. We'll see. We're going to discuss some Baal issues in a moment. And so we're going to also see that Constantine saw himself as Christ, that the Christ that he had created for us, he could be that person. He could be the Christ he had created at Nicaea. And that to me is a real wake-up call to any Trinitarian to go, oh, Doug, you can't prove that he thought he was Christ. Wait till you see the end of how he laid out the mausoleum where he put the 12 apostles' esophaguses all around him, and he's in the center in his own little esophagus in a mausoleum. And even this author, Professor Walraff, says that means he thought he was a new Christ. Let's put it that way. All right. So we'll get into this, and I think you'll find it interesting spiritually and also historically. But more importantly, is all the history books are written wrong. And this professor is starting to show us a way out of all this lying to us, of this misrepresentation that had to go on, apparently, because our forefathers were cowards. And maybe Eusebius was a coward. Maybe he was a secret agent. I don't know. But the bottom line is they gave us a fraudulent appearance of history of what was going on at the time. And now we're starting to see the rest of the story. This guy, Constantine, never was on our side. He was never on Team Christ. He was on Team Constantine. Let's bring the Christians into the solar religion. That's what he believed. And we're going to show you that conclusively if you just give me a minute. So I've already told you the name on the coin is the god Constantine. Divus Constantinus is saying that the word Constantinus means Constantine the Great. Divus means God. God Constantine the Great. That's literally what that says. And I want to show you something that you might not immediately know, see, or understand. But I want to show you something. Here are the consecration coins of other emperors. As they're dying, they say, hey, I want to do a consecration coin. You will not see anywhere, and you can see they have the right to ask certain words be put in abbreviation on the coin. So there's not a lot of room on a coin. So they had this really interesting tradition where they use abbreviations, and they had a code system. So you could pick what you wanted from the code and you would put on there. The word divus doesn't appear on anybody else's thing, and none of them dared even claim they were God. So just so you know, even though emperors were all considered divine, some of them didn't take it serious, like Marcus Aurelius. And if you wanted to say they were divine, they would think of it in more of a, you're a good man type of thing. So they weren't crazy. Did Nero really think he was a god? Maybe, but in an insane way that he could kill people. But the imagery they have on the reverse side is not showing gods, and nothing on the side shows gods. The only exception might be Antoninus Pius. If you look there, it could be that he is. We'd have to see this more clearly. But I'm looking at it, and if you see, there's that standing figure is actually holding a balance of justice. So this is not the standard image of Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus is holding a sword in one hand and a globe in the other. So this standing figure could be, if you looked at it more carefully, not what it appears to me to be. So I'm saying it doesn't appear to be Sol Invictus because of the balances in one hand, and I can't see what's in the other hand. So I mean, I could do a whole research on that, but just in superficial appearance and by the descriptions that these four emperors gave, and these are contemporaries essentially, not contemporaries in the sense, but like the last couple hundred years before Constantine, none of them are claiming they're God. None of them are going over the top and saying crazy things. And but you will see they all use AVG, which means Augustus, which is a Latin term that means revered. One of the Caesar Augustus made it so people thought that was actually his first name. A lot of people think, oh, isn't his name Augustus? No, that meant he was revered. So it was sort of to go along with the idea that they are revered is emperors as rulers. Remember, you're allowed to worship rulers even in the Bible. You can worship David, it said in First Chronicles. So you could use the term revered with a human being in that limited sense. Okay. So anyway, so AVG, you'll see they all have AVG, AVG, AVG. Okay. So they all have that, but there's none of the other craziness of the, now let's go back, of this. The Divus Constantinus, and then AVG Pater, and that meant revered father, and AVGG meant revered among two emperors. The GG meant plural. So that's what it is. It's a crazy statement, and that's why uh, Professor Martin Wallraff can honestly say he represented himself as the sun god, because that is what Divus Constantinus means. So here we have, finally, if you had any doubt, if you were doubting for any reason that this man wasn't pagan, now you can just clearly just rule it out. He's claiming he's God. And that whole thing where the statue and the the pillar, Constantinian pillar in the middle of Constantinople, and he put his face in there. If you had any doubt, he thought he was God, and that's why he put it in there. It's gone. It's gone. This is 337. He put that uh, uh, what do you call it? Pillar up there in 324. From 324 to 325, it's being built before Nicaea, and then after Nicaea, it continues to be built through 328. So that thing is finished in 328, but it must have been enough that people should have known and could have known at that time, before Nicaea, that we're dealing with a crazy man who thinks he's God. His face is in the god Apollo. And if you had any doubt, here it is at the end of days, when he has a chance to either repent as a Christian. If you think he's a Christian, he doesn't repent. He doubles down on claiming he is God. And so I wanted to show you something else sneaky about this guy. Oh, and so what we proved last time, just to be another reminder here, is this whole idea of Cairo. So a big mistake even Professor Wallraff made was to assume that because there was a Cairo on a coin in 315 AD, that Constantine was a true Christian, because C and R are the first two letters of Christos, right? The anointed one, right? However, CR are also the first two letters in Greek of the word Christus, which means good. And it symbolized, or was words that were used in pagan art. Here it is, the Ptolemy. This is from 250 years before Jesus. The CR is right over here. You can see, if you look carefully, there's the Cairo that you're familiar with seeing. See, this is a Cairo over here. It looks like a P inside of an X. Well, it's right over here in a coin from what is it? 222 BCE, before Christ. And there it is on this coin in 316 Christian era. And we're being told that this is a symbol. Constantine was a Christian, because we can see it on the symbols of the soldiers in 316. No, that's not a symbol of Christ. That's a symbol of pagan deity of this eagle character on the bottom right. And Constantine knows that. He served in Egypt at one time, and the Greeks had conquered Egypt way back in the 300s. And so that's why that's there, and that was a pagan symbol. So you have Christian scholar who's even looking deeply into these things, and he was fooled by that coin. He said this was a coin proving in 316 AD that Constantine was a good Christian in some respects. Somehow he couldn't believe there was one piece of evidence that proved Constantine's coins were not entirely pagan, and he thought it was this one. But even that's eliminated. So we showed you that last time. So we continue. So now there is really absolutely no basis to believing Constantine is a Christian if you just look at coins and you look at the final coin, and then you have that infamous baptism. Did he really do that, or was he already dead when Constantine declared, "Oh, he's been baptized. Oh, but he's also dead"? That's how everybody reported it. Now here is Martin Wallraff. I want you to understand, he's a legitimate professor. He's an evangelical theologian, a faculty member at Ludwig Maximilians Universität München, and this article was published in Studia Patristica, 34th volume, and in 2001. And then I've gone through this before. Now, I want to preface where we're going here because I think you see, let's go back to this is the coin he struck. And you see, this is a chariot over here. He's on a chariot. He's racing. He's raising his right. He's got his left hand on the reins. He's got his right hand holding his hands up to what looks like the sun. And he wants to be taken into heaven by, well, on the chariot of the sun god. So who knows what god he's appealing to? Probably himself, if you think about what he's doing here. So this is a standard imagery of Baal in Syria when this religion of Sol Invictus was first brought to Rome. And then Sol Invictus morphed into, that's a Latin word, Sol Invictus, morphed into back to the religion of Apollo, which is the god of the sun in Greek, when Constantine moved the empire's capital from Rome, a Latin-speaking community, to Constantinople, which was a Greek-speaking community. So now it was most often called Apollo, now that he was there. So that is how the chariot was being used at that time. So what did I want to bring you to see here? Oh, so I wanted you to see that this is the leftover. This was the implantation back in the 200s by Basinius. He's the one who brought Baal, Baal, actually Baal. And then when people didn't like that name, he created something called El Gabal, but it's still, it was Elohim likely, apparently, and then Baal at the end, and who knows what the middle consonant was for, El Gabal, and we showed you in the prior episode, I think it was, 1 Kings 18 is the battle of Elijah against Baal. Well, a scholar, Jordan Jones, wrote a PhD thesis called "Who Makes the Clouds His Chariot: The Comparative Method and the mythopoetical motif of cloud riding in Psalm 104 and the epic of," guess who? Baal. So this is a big deal. So it was not a coincidence that when Baal came to Rome under that name and was being introduced by a native Syrian, who became emperor of Rome by some freak. How did that happen? He's not even a Roman. A Syrian becomes the emperor of Rome, and he brings this from his native Syria near Jerusalem, not far from Jerusalem. He's bringing this god Baal into Rome, and he brought with it this symbology of the chariot. And I just wanted to show you that is at the end of Constantine's days, he has still got this image of the same chariots that were being used by Baal originally back here in this, what's called the Ugaritic epic of Baal. And so Baal is depicted there as a rider of the clouds. And he's also pointing out that Yahweh is in one of the Psalms, Psalm 104, verse 3. It says, Yahweh is the one who makes the clouds his chariot, who walks on the wings of the wind. So Yahweh claims that right. So just between Yahweh and Baal, we have a competition, right? Well, that's maybe deliberate on the part of the Baal people, because they can read Psalm as well. And Psalm goes back many centuries prior to the time Baal first appears in Syria and in that religious context before I think before even the battle between the Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Okay, I'm going to take a break. My cat wants some food. Okay, so we told you this Ugaritic text on Baal has all this symbology of him being a charioteer, heading up into the clouds and so on. Well, Ugarit is an ancient city in Syria on the Mediterranean coast. So that means the same language that the emperor of Rome, who was Basinius, who brought Baal to Rome initially to be this new god who would be, we'll see in the myth of the Ugaritic text, this god wants to be the head god of all the gods. So this is kind of a radical thing that Basinius is doing. He's bringing in a Semitic god, meaning a god known in basically in the same culture of the Hebrews and the people who are Semitic speaking languages. So they're all related type cultural people. And he's brought this culture, which has an idea of supremacy of God Yahweh, versus Baal, who thinks he's supreme God, into Rome. And that's where this whole thing comes from, where it ends up Baal becomes Elgabalus, and then that becomes Sol Invictus, and that becomes Apollo in Greek-speaking lands at Constantinople when that big tower goes up, that pillar goes up. So you see, this is all connected back to the Bible. It's not. It's not it's a direct connection. It's not a theoretical one. It's clearly what happened with Basinius when he brought Baal into Rome as a new god and a charioteer and all the things that went with it. Okay, so going back to this text by Mr. Jones, he's saying there's the Ugaritic, meaning Syrian, epic of Baal, and Baal is depicted there as a rider of the clouds. And then if you jump to the summary of that text, that's at page 58 of his work. And this is free online. You can download this. Just type in the information I gave you. You'll find it. And then in 14 places, this epithet, meaning cloud rider, so that this god Baal rides on the clouds using chariots, it occurs in these Baal texts within this work, the Ugaritic work. And he wants kingship, and he's also a divine warrior. So that divine warrior thing fit in perfectly with Rome. This god is a warrior who wants to defeat and kill the other gods. And his enemy, by the way, is a god whose name is not far from Yahweh. It's Yam, who he calls the god of the sea. And the two are fighting because Baal desires to build a palace for himself to declare kingship over the other gods. Yam is less than pleased with this assertion. Baal insults Yam and claims that he will fall. It is Baal, I think he meant to say, Baal, however, who is losing the battle with Yam. Then they have a battle, and then he defeats Yam. So this is a dream of Baal prophets, but they failed. Remember 1 Kings 18. And then all right. So again, the emphasis at page 60 of his article was that Baal is called the Cloud Rider in relation to his being a warrior. So the feature of how the war would be conducted by Baal is in this chariot. So this is a warrior portrayal. It isn't, this is his Sunday riding, go to church best type of appearance. This is his way of fighting the back off the other gods, going up into the clouds and defeating all the other gods. So he becomes the supreme ruling god. Page 63 of this article by Mr. Jones. The context is still kingship at this point in the story he's recounting, and the theme is extended by Baal's complaining about the insufficiency of their other gods who make sacrifices to him. In this, he expresses his superiority over them. So again, this is something I didn't see before, is that this God and the God really of Constantine wants supremacy, to be the supreme God. And he's the god of the sun in the first genesis of him at Rome. And that would most closely align to Apollo in Greek literature. But they didn't, they had this, the god of the sun in Rome was not as superior as to other gods. And now with Baal, and then Elgabalus is his new name, and then Sol Invictus is the best name possible, the unconquerable sun. He's now a militaristic god who could serve perfectly within the military. And then that explains why the Mithras religion, which had also a militaristic god, was very appealing to the people who were running the army, and in the army, the military officers, and then the people who had to fight the battles. They now had a god they could relate to. He was a battler, and he used chariots, and he fought the enemy this way. And I think I already told you about this screen capture. So the prior consecration coins, and that's what we're trying to look at here, have nothing to do with declaring somebody's God divine in a true divine sense. The Roman emperors are actually all practical guys most of the time. They don't really believe all that hokum stuff. But Constantine did. He really did. He really thought he was God, and that's why he put divinus on his consecration coin, leaving no possibility that you could misunderstand what he means. And you can't imagine that any Christian in his close circle was happy. That also means he must have had close confidants who were not Christians, who he knew would do his bidding. And that, to me, this is the first time you get a real clue that the Christian bishops do not have a monopoly over Constantine. And that's what you think. You'd think they're always around him and they're consulting with him. No, 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 no. He has his own troop, and he says, I want a coin to call me God. He couldn't give that to Eusebius's request. Eusebius would go crazy. I mean, even Eusebius, a psychopath, would not go that far. Here we go. Now we're back to page 263 of Professor, what's his name again? Let me I want to make sure I don't get it wrong. Here he is, Wallraff, Professor Wallraff. Okay, so we're going to look at his page 263. The most significant and most interesting use of solar symbols by Constantine is found on his consecration coin. So we've seen it. It is the last word and the legacy, and the legacy of the dead emperor and his religious policy. Here, too, we find a person on a quadriga, the chariot, driving upwards towards the sky. From above, a hand is stretching out to receive the charioteer. The precise significance of this iconography has been debated, as a result of which two important statements can be made. Firstly, this coin cannot be understood without the tradition of solar iconography. Here, it may be sufficient to recall the soul on Constantine's arch in Rome. And secondly, the coin contains no hint of a Christian background. In particular, the ascension of Christ or Elijah is not being alluded to, since both these scenes only develop much later. Furthermore, the ascension of Christ cannot be said to draw upon solar motifs, and the ascension of Elijah needs further iconographic details to be qualified as such. This does not mean that it was impossible for Christians to be reminded of Christ's ascension on seeing the coin, but that the association was rather remote. In any case, the primary interpretation, that is the solar one, was dominant, meaning it screams out at you. I mean, there's it looks like to me that's the sun. Let's look at this image ourselves again. If you look at it carefully, that looks like the sun. You see how there's rays coming out of this, and there's a cloud right there. So the sun is shining out at him, and so he is reuniting with himself somehow in his death. I guess that's how he saw it. So, because he believes he's the Sol Invictus, he's God. He depicts himself that way on that pillar. Even Eusebius was not able to offer a Christian reading, as we shall see below. So, the consecration coin is going to be summarized by Eusebius, and you'll see he doesn't say anything that can possibly explain it in a Christian way. Page 264. What is certainly unusual on the consecration coin is the hand from the sky. There are no parallels in similar imperial representations. So if you go to all those coins, let's go back to these coins I showed you. There's nothing. Go back in these are imperial coins that are for other emperors who've died. They never came up with this idea of a hand from heaven and approaching heavens with a chariot. No, this is totally new and radical, frankly. Okay, so he's correct. So it has no parallels. Here's where he says it. No parallels in similar imperial representations. However, the enigma cannot be resolved by an appeal to Christian tradition, because there are no parallels there either. The nearest we can get is a pagan text, a panegyric to Constantine's father, who is consecrated, Iove ipso dexterum porregente. If Jove stretched out his right hand to receive Constantius, so that's what that's saying. Iove is Jove. If Jove stretched out his right hand to receive Constantius, that's his father, the identity of the deity to whom the hand on Constantine's coin belongs needs to be addressed. Well, who is Jove? Jove is the supreme god of at that time when his father dies. By Jove, you've heard that before. Well, Jupiter and all that. So that's a different god than Sol Invictus. And we can see that Constantine has completely gone away from wherever his father was at the time he did his consecration coin, when he died as emperor. As in the case of the Divinitas on his triumphal arch, on Constantine's triumphal arch at Rome, the one to the Milvian Bridge, there is no clear answer, and the ambiguity is probably deliberate. However, the attempts to find the answer cannot ignore the context of the solar iconography. So now he's going to continue to try to solve this mystery. I don't think it's any mystery at all what he's saying. So he's acting, I think, a little bit more like, I got to figure this out. He's how many times did he have to tell you, sir, that he worships Sol Invictus? He put it on every coin. He put it on the statue at the Milvian Bridge when he supposedly is worshiping Jesus with the Cairo, which is another phony claim he made. I mean, so I don't think this professor should even spend one more word on it, but we're going to see if he has anything. Well, this was actually interesting. So he mentions this. Finally, an examination. So he had some other specious things. I didn't include them. I don't think they amount to hill beans, but they're just simply corroborating that it's Sol Invictus. Okay. But here's where he says something interesting on top of those. Finally, an examination of the architecture in Constantinople should also prove useful, in particular the most representative buildings of the new city, the Church of the Apostles and the Hagia Sophia. So in other words, he's saying, hey, another way of trying to interpret what is this coin telling us is to look at the architecture of the Church of the Apostles and the Hagia Sophia at Constantinople that were recently built by Constantine, right? The problem in both cases, however, is that absolutely nothing has survived. Oops. Oh. And in the case of Hagia Sophia, it is not even certain that a Constantinian structure ever existed. That seems bizarre to me. Hence, what I say about these buildings remains highly hypothetical and sketchy. Okay. When Justinian built the new Hagia Sophia, so Justinian is an emperor in the 500s in Constantinople of the Eastern Empire, but he built a, quote, new Hagia Sophia. He had a number of statues removed. So there must have been some sort of building that statues existed that was supposed to be the Hagia Sophia from previously, so whatever. Among these statues included 12 zodia. I think that means zodiac symbols from the zodiacs. Each month has its own zodiac, so you have 12 zodiac symbols. The moon and other astrological figures. It can be argued that these statues form part of Constantinian sanctuary of imperial wisdom. So if he had a place where there was Sophia, he apparently had 12 zodia inside of his temple of wisdom. He called it the Hagia Sophia. If this was the case, it would be surprising if the sun had not played a major role in this ensemble. So you had this in the zodiac system, you had 12 zodiacs and you had the sun at the center of the zodiac, if you will, because these 12 months rotate around the sun in this pagan architecture of the zodiac. When we turn to the Church of the Apostles, it is totally impossible to adhere to the principle of not using Eusebius. Okay, so now he's been trying not to say what Eusebius says, but now he says, there's no way to talk about this without talking about this, because what happened is what was done at the time of Constantine is so offensive. Christians eventually took a couple hundred years. They eventually got around to getting rid of what he had done. And you don't hear about that by any of the so-called scholars of Christianity. Without him, we would know virtually nothing about the Constantinian building, which served primarily as the mausoleum of the emperor. Not surprisingly, Eusebius gives an interpretation Christiana of the construction. So when it was in existence and Eusebius is still alive, he's trying to be an apologist for it. The imperial sarcophagus was in the middle of 12 holy monuments. That's interesting. And it's described, though, as sarcophagi by other people, meaning they were tombs of the 12 apostles, you'll see, which in Eusebius' interpretation are symbols of the 12 apostles. So Eusebius is trying to make it sound, just so you know, other people say these are sarcophagus of the 12, and they were brought there deliberately from all over where they could be found. But the way Eusebius describes it is they're symbols of the 12 apostles. They're not really in the boxes. From a Christian perspective, the problem, but it's immaterial to the point here is, what is Constantine thinking? Why does he want the 12 monuments or 12 sarcophagi of the 12 apostles to be in this church building, or this Hagia Sophia, or excuse me, in the Church of the Apostles? Why does he want them in there? How is that going to serve any purpose? From a Christian perspective, the problem was that this clearly implied an identification of the emperor with Christ. Okay, so you see, if you put, and this is what happened, is Constantine was in the middle. So you put him at the center, then you have the 12 sarcophagi or monuments to the 12 apostles all around him, right? Well, what does that symbolize? Is he a 13th apostle? No, he thinks he's Christ in some bizarre way. And remember, he's the one who made Christ into a god at Nicaea. He's the one who came up with the solution of Amusia, that is, a human being could be God by having something eternal infused into his body physically, materially, and he believes Constantine is a god, right? So he must be believing that that's happened to himself, and so Christ is just a type of himself. That's how he's thinking. Not it doesn't make sense to us, like, that's crazy talk, but that's what he thinks. Okay. The problem was this is funny, in a way it's funny. The problem was resolved at a later period by the removal of the emperor's sarcophagus. In other words, "Hey, let's just take his sarcophagus out of here and nobody will, realize he's claiming to be Christ, or another Christ." It can be asked whether from a pagan perspective, the original disposition could not also have been seen as the symbols of the 12 zodiac. So those 12 apostles could have been seen as 12 zodiacs, and then Constantine would be like the sun in the middle of them, just like the zodiac operates in astrological uh, divination, all those type of things. So now we're going to look at the Church of the Apostles a little bit more in depth. Page 264 of the professor's article. When we turn to the Church of the Apostles, okay, no, you know what? We've already dealt with this. Okay, all right. Oh, there it is. So I kept the second page for this. So the footnote on the sarcophagus being removed is from John Chrysostom. So he's I think he's a bishop actually. He wrote a book against the Jews and the Gentiles. I guess he doesn't like anybody. Anyway, but he is the late 300s. And he is saying, "Hey, you know what? Let's take this the Semper sarcophagus out of there." So that means that by the 400s, this mausoleum has already been, I don't want to say desecrated, but Christians have had so low regard for what Constantine was doing, they removed his body and his tomb out of there from the 12 apostles, so they wouldn't be in the same room together. That should be some sign that whoever had any conscience at all as a Christian said, this is we can't have this guy as a pagan. We're not going to have him with our 12 apostles." So somebody had some righteous thinking at this point, and that's absolutely a good step. Okay. So now let's finish the sentence we didn't get to see before. It can be asked whether from a pagan perspective the original disposition could not also be seen as the symbol of the 12 zodiac with the sun in the center. Okay, I said that. That was maybe a secondary way Constantine wanted you to see it. So either he's the Christ or the sun, or all three. He's the sun, he's Christ, and he's the sun who is the God above in the sky. We will probably never find an answer to this question, not even with the results of excavations on the site of the modern Mehmet Fat Camille. I mean, yeah. So some of this you have to just surmise what's going on. It's like nobody's writing down, and Constantine is not explaining. Okay, so now we're going to look at page 266 of the professor's article. Finally, we might ask how Eusebius deals with the above mentioned measures. Eusebius, again, is the Christian historian from the early 300s to the middle 300s, and a big apologist for Constantine. So, if you want to know what's going on, he's the guy that will tell you, but he's always very pro-Constantinian. We might ask how Eusebius deals with the above mentioned measures where the emperor used solar symbolism overtly and programmatically, and not only in a political sense. 3 different tactics can be observed. Wherever possible, Eusebius tries to give a Christian interpretation, as was the case with the imperial mausoleum, the so-called Church of the Apostles. We do not know to what extent this Christian interpretation was justified by the building itself. Where such an interpretation was not possible, Eusebius sometimes confined himself to a mere description without any further comment. This is the case with the consecration coin, about which he writes. I want to pause there for a minute. So, all of the preface that I just told you, he had, if you'd read the whole article, you'd see he went into this whole thing about the Church of the Apostles and the Hagia Sophia as some means or method of trying to understand what that coin meant. So we've just been going in a path of trying to review all that stuff, but all along what he wanted to get to is, what does this coin mean? Now, I don't think there's any doubt what it means. Constantine is claiming he is God the Son, or the God in the sky known as the sun in their view of deities. So, but anyway, so now he's getting down to, well, let's consider, what does Eusebius say the coin is? And he's going to say what Eusebius does is just simply describe what's on the coin without telling you any obvious significance of any of it. So he says this, Eusebius, a coinage was also of holy harmony and concord. Really? Holy harmony and concord. See, this is just how you lie to people. You just put a nice couple of words over it. It was holy harmony and concord. That's what the coin was. Holding the reins high above them, he rides along, traversing all lands alike, as the sun gazes upon himself, present everywhere and watching over everything. Period. End of statement. That's all he had to say. What? Holy harmony and concord? Wait a minute. You've been living in Rome. You know what these symbols are. This is the symbol of Baal. This is the symbol of Baal in his chariot, riding up into the sun. He is a pagan god known as Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus would always be depicted in Latin speaking countries as riding a chariot that they're on top of the Arch of the Triumph. Is actually the same image you see here. The chariot with the Sol Invictus is driving the chariot. That was literally on top of the Arch of Constantine at Rome, next to the Colosseum, even to this day. But they were removed some later point in time and put in some sort of museum. But they were all made of bronze or whatever. So there is no way that Eusebius doesn't know this is depicting Constantine as Sol Invictus, as the god Sol Invictus, and he is now reaching up his hand for what, though? That's the question. Is that God? That looks like it's God the Son, but he is God the Son. So what is going on here? He is obviously rejoining himself where his true self is. So he was sort of in a human form, like Jesus. Remember, he's been around Christians enough to know that Christ ascended. This is the ascension of Constantine to heaven. Do you see? That's what's going on here. He is rising up to God the Son, which is himself, who's been dwelling in him on earth. So he is clearly got a completely pagan idea of who he is. And that's why, you see, this is why I'm so happy that the British Museum gives you the inscription content, and it says Divus Constantius, God Constantine the Great. He doesn't equivocate who he is. He is a god. He is a god returning to heaven, just like Jesus ascended to heaven. You see how he thinks? So this is just Eusebius, you're just full of balderdash here, my friend. You think we're stupid. Now, I'm serious, ladies and gentlemen. He thinks we're stupid, that we can't see with our own eyes what's going on here. But you know what? He's an apologist. But I hope to God he had some secret plan of helping Christianity, and he wasn't just all an apologist. But we'll never know, maybe, until we get there, God willing. Okay, so I just want to show you, there's another version of the same coins. I mean, can you imagine if this is what we had to figure out? So luckily, this is what's at Harvard, the consecration coin of Constantine. Pretty bad. And notice it said it's made after 337. So Constantine dies in 337. So these coins are generated. They're solid gold coins, a solidus, like an ounce of gold or whatever, a lot of gold. This was considered a really great memorial to have if you were a person at that time. And so this is how Constantine wanted to be remembered by everybody, by these images. So this is not a insignificant thing. And just so you know, that I didn't make up all those things about how you're supposed to interpret the inscriptions. So there's actually a website, How to Read Ancient Roman Coins. And so you'll see these, if you see AVG, it means Augustine, or Augustus, meaning the word revered, and so on and so forth. And so here was my translation: Divus Constantinus, God Constantine the Great. That's all you can say. AVG Pater, see AVG Pater, and Augustus means revered. So I would assume he means revered father. So he is a father. He murdered one of his children, who he suspected was coming on to his wife, not the mother of his son, but a second wife, or his wife apart from that son. And he killed the son, and then he learned that maybe his wife had given him a false rumor, and he killed his son wrongly, and then he killed his wife. Who knows if he did kill either one of them correctly? With, by the way, no right of trial, just simply ordered them executed. And that's why he's called a murderer. He murdered his own family, and he did this right around the time of Nicaea. I think it was just before. So he's a murderer. He's a murderer. And he claims to be a Christian. You can't. And Rome, by the way, had some of the best legal procedures in the world. You had the right of defense. You had the right to call witnesses. You had all these rights. But he didn't give it to his own family. He didn't give it to his son and his wife. And both of them were accused based on hearsay, which is considered, even under Roman law, was like inadmissible evidence. You've got to have actual proof. It's sort of like our system. They use a similar level of proof that we did. And so these people were just murdered without any legal procedure being followed. Then what did it mean, AVGG? Well, AVGG means, according to another website on how to read coins, when there were two emperors, the plural is sometimes shown as AVGG. So AVGG means two emperors. So the way I read it is revered father, and then it seems to be the revered among two emperors. So, and when was he with another emperor? Well, almost his entire career, he always had another emperor who was co-ruling. And now you have to know, under Roman law, you had to have two emperors, not one, and not two emperors, but two consuls who were running the country. And that was a good idea because it meant they could each check each other. So neither one of them could be tyrannical. You would never have a tyranny, and you would never have, a one person type rule. But Constantine didn't like that, so he killed Maxentius to get control. But that didn't actually give him all of the Roman Empire. So that left Licinius, who still had control of other key segments, and there was battling forth. Then there was 10 years of peace. And then eventually Constantine decides to become more aggressive and go after Licinius and basically defeats him, and then ultimately has him executed a year after that peace of that attack. And so he became the sole emperor in 324. So from 324 to 337, he is the sole emperor. Okay, so that concludes this episode. And basically, we've discussed Constantine's consecration coin. Doesn't get a lot of attention, does it? But does it? It definitely deserves it, because it puts, again, another nail in the coffin, so to speak, that Constantine would, at his death, do the thing that was the most serious thing he believed in, which is, who is he? What is his identity? And he revealed it unquestionably, indubitably, that he believed he was God the Son, and he was now returning to himself. He's ascending back to himself in heaven, not to Christ, but to himself, because he's riding the chariot of Baal. This was the chariot that had been used since Basinius, and then all the succeeding emperors. This was how Sol Invictus was depicted. And so he wanted us to see himself as a charioteer conquering God of the Sun. This is directly out of Baal worship from the time Basinius left Syria in the 200s, all the way up to this 337 date of death of Constantine. And he wanted us all to see him. Constantine wanted us to see him as a Constantine figure. He had himself buried in the mausoleum at the center of the 12 apostles, whose monuments or sarcophagi were all surrounding Constantine, to symbolize that Constantine was now Christ. And if Christ is God, according to Constantine, that's who created the idea that Jesus was Christ, Jesus was God at Nicaea. Therefore, since now Constantine is depicting himself as in the position of Christ over the 12, therefore we should identify it with God as well. So the Christians should identify with Constantine as God, and the pagans should identify with Constantine as God due to the symbology on his coins. So it's clear what he's saying. And therefore, by the way, his own view about the homoousios doctrine solving the Trinity issue. So in Nicaea, the verse John 17, 1-3 was put forth as the very first proposition of the whole meeting, by the way. That's proven fact. That's put forth by Arius and said, see, Jesus is not God, and the Father is the only true God. And that's where it got stuck right off the bat. So Arius did the exact right thing to block the idea that Jesus is God. And it was Constantine who came up with the solution. I know what to do. Well, this solution was self-interested, is what I'm going to point out here. He wants you to believe he's God in the flesh, homoousios, that he has the same substance of the God that he worships, the God of the Son in heaven, right? He believes that God the Son is himself. So he probably came up with the same idea that he has some substance of God the Father. Maybe got a suntan, maybe got burned. Who knows how he came up with this idea? But that's what he used to convince us. And he wrote this himself in this letter to the bishops at the end of Nicaea, all the bishops who couldn't be there, and there were hundreds that couldn't make it. And he told them of the decision, and he congratulated himself, patted himself on the back. I made the decision that we would come to the view that Jesus is of the same substance, the homousios. That means same substance in Greek, and I think also in Latin. I think it's a word that can mean it in both languages. And so that was the solution. And Jesus could be God because an eternally God, because this material fluid or substance inside of Jesus was eternal, even though Jesus himself was begotten in time. So you'll see if you read the Nicene Creed, the original one, not the later one, but the original one is Jesus was begotten, not made, of the same substance with the Father, true God from true God, life from true God, whatever. So that's how he got Jesus to be God. And that was self-interested because, see, that's what he thinks he is. He thinks he has the homousios with God the Son. See, so this was all part of a deliberate way of setting us up to be co-opted into his religion. He's not trying to get into our religion. He's trying to get our religion into his view of things, where we would worship him as God the Son in the sky, and we would see him as the new Christ. And that's exactly what does he say here? The coin was struck where he is represented as the sun god. And so that's what he meant. And then he said also, Martin Wallworth said that he was depicting himself as the new Christ when he had the mausoleum set out where the 12 apostles' monuments or sarcophagi are surrounding his esophagus to give him basically the highest honor among all of the 12 apostles. Okay, everybody, I hope that helped. And I think this is really sealing and closing off this whole notion permanently that Constantine was a Christian ever. Murdered his wife, his son, Licinius, Maxentius. These were co-rulers, had every right to rule just like anybody else, but he was a murderer and a killer and basically the most pagan person you've ever met, and basically destroyed. I believe truly he destroyed the Christian religion in Rome in 324, at Constantinople, Nicaea in 324. That was a destructive act to the Christian faith. It was, and it's to this day it is destroyed and caused the loss of millions of Christian souls to idolatry. And there's no way around that. I'm sorry, you might not like it. You might not like thinking you've got to repent, but that's what you've got to do. Every one of you who've fallen in with the what this man did to our church, you have to repent of it. I was a Trinitarian. It's still, my books that are proof that I was a Trinitarian at one point. I have repented. I'm trying to do everything I can to save every soul I possibly can from that error, on top of all the other errors we have to deal with. But that is really very big on the list that we all have to deal with who still are in that mindset. Okay, God bless. Take care, everybody. Ciao. Bye.